So welcome everybody to another episode of Macklin's Take with me, Andy Clark and Matt Macklin. Hope everybody's well. I've spent the last couple of weeks in Poland. I've been at the Youth World Championships in Kielce, which is about 150 kilometers south of Warsaw, just in case you were wondering. It was great. It was great. COVID conditions still, of course, but Iba did an amazing job getting through the tournament. Not everybody came. There were some big nations missing. USA weren't there. Not that many from the Americas were there, actually. But Cuba were there, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Ukraine, Russia, some big powerhouses. So it's just really, it's always great to see a new generation of fighters come through and get to know them a little bit before they kind of hit the mainstream. Macklin, all well with you?
All good, all good. I'm interested to hear from you in the coming weeks. Who were the standout guys? You did give me the heads up on one or two, so it'll be interesting to follow their progress. And looking forward to this podcast with Jerry.
100%. We were sent an email, or Matt was, a few days ago, a couple of weeks ago, maybe actually, from Fred Sternberg, offering the gentleman who's on today as a guest. And I'm not just saying this. I kind of half fell off my chair. I was so eager to get this arranged, because it's not often that you get the opportunity to speak to somebody who has been around the sport at the highest level, who has been right at the top end of the sports journalism profession for as long as he has, because he's been working at the same publication, which is incredible in itself, the Newark Star Ledger, for 70 years. He's covered all sorts of things, 50 plus Super Bowls, 50 plus Kentucky derbies, and he has been there for some of the biggest, most of the biggest fights in boxing history, post-war, you would probably say, from the 60s onwards. And there's nothing better than first-hand accounts than speaking to someone who's able to say, I was there. Or if you say to them, well, how do you know that he thought that? Or did he really say that? And they just say, yeah, because he said it to me. It's just great. It's just, there's nothing better than that. And he's got a book coming out. It's a re-release, actually. It's called Once There Were Giants. I'll just put it up for the camera there. I've got my copy because I bought it when it originally came out in 2017, The Golden Age of Heavyweight Boxing. It's been re-released in paperback and is out about pretty much now, actually. I think next week or the week after. You can pre-order at Amazon at the minute, and you can pre-order it at Barnes & Noble as well. But I strongly recommend you to get your hands on it. Once There Were Giants, it's called, The Golden Age of Heavyweight Boxing. And it talks about the period from 1962. So we go from Liston, Patterson to 1997, and it finishes with the bite fight between Mike Tyson and Evander Holyfield. And the gentleman in question is he's what the young people these days would call an OG of boxing writing. It's Jerry Izenberg. Jerry, thanks very much for doing this. How are you?
Thanks for the introduction. I usually say old fart, but it's close.
Well, I had a really good think about this. I reread the book last week, and I was thinking, what's the best way? Because we could do about 10 hours on this with you, but and I'd be totally happy to do that, completely happy to do it. But you've got things to do, I would imagine. So it's that period, 35 years from 62 to 97, and one period that I always find really interesting is the very beginning of that, because it takes in the two fights between Liston and Patterson, who I think in themselves are two contrasting, very interesting characters, particularly Liston. And I'm not sure if he really gets his due in the heavyweight pantheon. And then, of course, the fights he had with Clay firstly, and then Ali as he became for the second one. There's just so much intrigue and mystery around them, but basically around kind of everything he did, because he wasn't the most forthcoming. I mean, I reckon I've tackled some quite difficult people for interviews, but I don't think they're on the same level as him. So first question really is, because you were there, as I say, this is the great thing about this. You were there and you knew him. What was he like?
You're talking about Liston now, right?
Liston, yeah.
Yeah. I like Liston very much. I know he was a thug at one point in his life, and There was a point when they wouldn't let him be anything else, which is part of the story. But you know, there's a great problem over here. I hope you don't have it over there. Some people mistake illiteracy for stupidity. Liston was illiterate, but he was far from stupid. And I want to give you a quote that he told me one day. He knocks out Patterson, bang, bang. He's the champion. They're going to have the rematch in Miami Beach, which they didn't because they couldn't sell tickets. But the day that Floyd Patterson opened his training camp, he's training at Hialeah Racetrack. Now, if you want to get to Hialeah, you're really going to want to get to Hialeah. You got to go through all these roads, these connectors, everything else. It take it from downtown Miami, probably take you 2 hours, not counting traffic. And 2,000 people show up on the grounds to see Floyd Patterson train, who fought about that first fight 2 minutes and 1 second. I can't believe it. So now I go to Liston's hotel. It's a kosher hotel in Miami Beach. They took it because nobody really else wanted them there. And I'm sure, I don't remember what it was called, but I'm sure the bill was never paid. Or they moved the fight to Vegas. But my point is this. I had a little to do with Sonny when just before they won the title. He had chased me. He didn't have to chase me. When he said go, I had a 5-yard head start. I wasn't going to sit there. I walked in and I saw Geraldine Liston, his wife, at the training camp. This is the first fight. And I walked over, I introduced myself, and I said, I'd like to talk to you for a minute. All of a sudden, my right shoulder went down to the floor. Liston is leaning on it, and he says, this is her side. You're over there. Sure, yes, sir. And I got to do anything and argue with him until he wins the title. At least let me get some money when he hits me. All right, so obviously we know he's won. Well, now he's training for this rematch, which didn't happen there. And it's incredible. 2,000 people to welcome Floyd Patterson. 6 people are in this makeshift gym by the swimming pool to watch Sonny train. And it's the night train routine, all this stuff that we all know about. And the loudspeaker comes on. Attention in the hotel. Ramon and Ramona will be giving cha-cha lessons in another 30 minutes. And this is the world champion. Nobody's paying any attention to him. So I got to talk to him, no matter how much you may remember from the first time. So I go and I hang around outside, and I look toward the beach. And there is Geraldine Liston in a beach chair looking at the ocean. Well, I said, if I got a way to Sonny, it's got to be through Geraldine. So I walk over and I said, Ms. Liston, I got to reintroduce. She said, no, you don't. I remember Charles was very rude to you in Aurora, Illinois. And I'm thinking, Charles, I know who has the pants in this family, right? So I'm sticking with her. She says, you will get your interview. Sit down. He will be here soon. All of a sudden, the sun disappears because he's standing between me and it. And she says, Charles, before you say anything, sit down. This is Mr. Izenberg. You were very rude to him in Illinois. Now, you give him the interview he needs. It's his livelihood. Now, Liston is mortified, right? Because she has now established who owns the territorial imperative. And he's got to find a way to save his face. I used to smoke a pipe in those days. He says to me, you can stay, but the pipe got to go. So I throw it in the ocean. I said, far enough for you? He said, well, talk. And then I give him the thing about everybody loves Floyd. They're out there. The guy didn't even fight. It was terrible. And how do you account 2,000 people? There's 6 people here. I could have shaken hands with everybody watching training. He looks at me and it's pauses. And if you got any aspiring reporters or even veteran reporters out there, this is a good piece of advice. Don't open your mouth. Let them think. Don't think he's dumb because he's taking a long time. Sonny always took a long time to answer. He wanted to say, make sure he came out with what Sonny wanted to come out with. And he looks at me finally and he says, and this is word for you, don't forget these quotes. If this be the olden days and the tribe follow the chief in the battle, I'd be scared. Maybe it'll be shorter this time. Great quote. And it taught me another thing. This guy's got a mind. We used to argue all the time how old he was. I really think he might have been older than Foreman when he went. And I used to tell him, he said, but I don't know how old. I said, Sonny, let me tell you something. Somewheres in Arkansas, there's a tree. And one day somebody carved your birthday on that tree. And I'm going to go back, and if they haven't chopped it down, I'll know how old you were. And he told that story for years. He told the same story. He was interesting. He was the last. Now, they're mob-owned fighters in the sense that a mobster might have a fighter. But the cabal, which was Blinky Palermo, and above him, Frankie Carbo, that went out the window except for the lightweight division because Sonny Liston lost the title to Ali, and Sonny was the last totally top mob-owned fighter. And it opened the door now where people could fight other people. And it changed boxing in many, many ways. And one more thing I'd like to say about him. His life was a mystery. His death was even a bigger mystery. Nobody knows how he died. I spoke to the policeman who found the body. I spoke to Gerald. This is what I know, and then I will speculate for you. I know that the body was dead for about 8 or 10 days. I know that Geraldine had taken the kid and gone to St. Louis to visit her mother. And therefore, it's possible if somebody was going to bump him off, that was the ideal time. He was alone in the house for about a week. And I do not think it's a drug overdose. I know he was terrified of needles when he wanted to give him shots for a cold or whatever. And that's just subjective, but I just have strong suspicions about it. They didn't find the needle was in his arm, okay, when he found him. There was no tourniquet, no strap, nothing to tie up the biceps so the vein stuck up and you could shoot. And they found a small stash of cocaine in the kitchen. That's not what I'd be looking for. So either one of three things happened. One, somebody didn't want him there and gave him a hot shot. Okay. And then they weren't going to leave what they tied him up with to get it in. The second thing was there were people who he had difficulties with, he had fights with, and one of them I'm not going to name right now, but that guy was the leading suspect for a long time. He was mob connected, he was Vegas connected. That's another guy. The third possibility is Sonny was in the West Side. It's a heavy black area in Vegas to pick up some drugs that day. The last day that anybody saw him. And I don't know whether he was going to resell them or whether he was going to use them. I have and there's no way to speculate. But that same house was knocked over by the cops after Sonny left. And it's very possible the guy was a really ruthless guy, decided Sonny was the stool pigeon who tipped off the cops. And that's the third possibility. And if you ask me which one I believe, I sure as hell don't have a clue. But I know one thing about the mystery of Sonny Liston. I went to see his grave here. Ironically, when I go, I'm going to be buried in the same cemetery. So that wasn't the reason. It's because it's on the airplane glide path, and I figure my kids can wave out the window. They don't have to be bothered. They can get back another plane and go home when I go. Anyway, as far as Sonny goes, I go to the grave, and I go with the cemetery superintendent. I can't find it, so I bring her out to find it. It says, the plate says Charles Sonny Liston. Under that, it says two words, a man. That's all it says. I look at the grave, and there's a basket of artificial flowers, and there are 4 pennies in a rectangle on the grave. Not part of the plate, but I mean put there. Sonny has no living relatives in Las Vegas, none. She went back to St. Louis. I mean, so who would what mystery person would do this? Well, the woman said to me, well, we sell those flowers in the, in our gift shop or whatever. So somebody bought them there, but I couldn't tell you who. I have no idea who would do that. Then as far as the pennies go, it was an old New Orleans custom in the voodoo days to put 4 pennies as payment for the ferryman at the river Styx. So when the deceased was on his way, the ferryman would take him to heaven and not to hell, right? Later on, GIs did it. A dime if you knew the deceased, a quarter if you were there when he was killed. But nobody knows who put them there. And that, to me, that his life began a mystery. We don't know his birth date. His connections were all mysterious. His friends, he had to look hard to find his friends. He had a lot of good friends. I mean, he had some bad ones, but I mean, a couple of good, Johnny Tocco, who ran the gym out here, he knew from St. Louis. He had a small circle of friends. But who put the pennies there? And it still bothers me, I must tell you. However, I remember him most, not so much for what happened with Patterson. And that was like setting up exercises in the morning, before you go anywhere. So I got to beat him. I'll beat him twice. 2 minutes and 1 second, 2 minutes and 15 seconds, or whatever. It was over. But I knew Ali. My friendship. A lot of the fighters that you will know in the book were close friends of mine. Foreman, Larry Holmes. Tyson was a friend. We got along, which was we never had an argument. Sonny and Ali. Ali was my friend for 50 years. One day I said to my wife, the son of a bitch is one of my 5 best friends. And she said, yeah, who are the other 4? And I couldn't answer. So it was maybe not have been an achievement to get Ali. But anyway, Ali stalked him. I met Ali at the 1960 Olympics in Rome. He won the cruiserweight title, the light heavyweight title at the Olympics. Being light, even today, you can't make a quarter with that title. It's very difficult, as you know, and I'm sure your listeners well know that. And so I didn't even go to the fight. They meeting to me. I do a lot of fights at the Olympics, but I went and did other things. I'm in the Olympic Village, and he's sitting on the steps, and he's got the medal around his neck, and he's holding it up. All these athletes are passing by. And he said, look at this, look at this. I'll be the world champion one day, and I'm the prettiest guy. And most of the people who walked past him couldn't understand one word of what he was saying. Guy from Bulgaria, oh yeah, that's what he said, right? Anyway, I noticed one thing though. All the female athletes walked 5 feet, stopped and turned to take a second look. And I said, this is a guy worth watching. And then we sort of, he kept writing me, he kept calling me and saying, you got to come see me fight. You got to come see. Well, that was because of Dundee. Angelo Dundee put him up to that. So now he calls me from Pittsburgh one day, and he says, you got to come. I'm fighting Charlie Powell. I'll knock him out in 2 hours. What do you want me to knock him out? I said, listen, champ, would-be champ, I'm going to tell you something. I ain't coming to Pittsburgh to see you fight a former professional football player in the middle of a snowstorm. I don't like to stop in Pittsburgh for gas when the sun is shining. So you will not see me. Knocks him out, and he calls me and says, you gotta, okay, so now I figure I'll see him once, it's all I gotta do. Because I have no faith in his boxing ability. And I'll tell you something, he became, like Foreman, a much better fighter later in life. After he won, after Foreman's come back, or after he won the title, he really, his boxing IQ just developed, bang. And Dundee had nothing to do with it, and all the people around him had nothing to do with it. He had his own boxing IQ, and he trained himself as far as I'm concerned. Angelo was great in camp because every time I was faced with that big white space in the paper, what am I going to write about? You call, and Angelo gives you a lot of bull crap, and it's great. It fills the white space. But Ali trained Ali, And if you want any proof of that, go back to the Foreman fight. And you remember he retreats to the ropes in the first down, and he first round, and he stays there for about 5-6 rounds with his gloves up. And Angie and the whole corner is screaming, "Get off the ropes! Get off the ropes!" And finally, he comes back and he says, "Everybody, shut the f up! I know what I'm doing." And I will say this for him: every time he stepped inside those ropes, he knew what he was doing. Anyway, he stalked Liston. So now when they move the title fight from Miami to Vegas, he shows up at the casino. I'm trying to remember which one. I think it was Caesar's Palace. I'm not sure. Anyway, Sonny goes about his business. And in the halls, Allie's yelling at him, "Hey, Bear, I'm going to take you out. I'm going to blah." And Sonny laughs. Sonny was amused, and he keeps on going. Now Sonny is playing blackjack. And Allie is standing behind him screaming. And now he's interfering with Sonny's thought process in the game. Sonny turns on his stool, wham, slaps him in the face. Not hard, but Allie, well, what'd you do that for? I'm trying to make us a lot of money. Why would you do that? Why would you hit me? Get the hell out of here. Okay. They finally get the fight. And Ali is just, here's a story. Here's one nobody else knows. Ali was always wanting more tickets for the fight. This is the big question. Now, I got to go back 1 minute. I'm sorry to ramble here, but I got to go back to Doug Jones because I thought Doug Jones won that fight. Very close, but he didn't look great. He had to have another fight, and this is where your audience comes in. He goes to fight Sir Henry Cooper. I think Henry Cooper was.
Did you come over? Sorry, did you come over for that? Did you come to England for that?
No, I did not see the fight. Well, he was not yet. We didn't know what he was. So I went to Africa, but I went to Malaysia, I went to Manila, but I didn't come here. But too much to my regret, because I've had many pleasant hours in London. Anyway, they make the Cooper fight. Cooper, to me, was not a good fighter. Cooper was on the cusp of a great fighter. Cooper was shortchanged by God, the high cheekbones. He cut all the time. Could fight. He had a left hook that if he couldn't use it the way Frazier did, but it could be just as devastating. So he comes over here for the fight, and I've often joked with Chuck Wepner, who bled all the time, as you remember, and Cooper bled all the time. I said, "Chuck, please, before you retire, fight him once. I just want the plasma concession, and I'll cash in on the way to the ring." Okay. Well, Ali thought he was in control. Wham! Cooper hits him with a hellacious left hook. Ali is down. I will tell you this. That's the worst thing that ever happened to British heavyweight boxing because the rules were different, and that's why Henry Cooper didn't become champion. You couldn't save a fighter, and they dragged him to the corner. That count would have continued when the bell rang, and he'd have lost. He couldn't get up. Okay, so he wins the fight, and now he's going to and he comes back, and we go through all this stuff in the casino with Liston. All right, now they're going to fight. So no, I didn't take him seriously. I mean, nobody could take him seriously. I don't see how you could. And honestly, I will tell you, some of that, look, nobody who gets in the ring is a coward. Nobody. If you get in, I don't care if you're out in 11 seconds, the act of getting in. And I found that out the hard way. I belonged to a boxing club. I had 3 fights. 2 of them I lost by being knocked unconscious. And the other one they gave me to get me the hell out of the gym. They were afraid they'd kill me. So no coward gets in the ring, right? So it wasn't that Ali was afraid. I'm saying, when I say fear, he was afraid of losing. He didn't want to lose. He wasn't afraid of Liston. He was afraid of losing. He had won every fight. Yeah, he was convinced. He believed he hadn't convinced everybody. They all thought he was a bullshitter, but this was his opportunity. So it wasn't fear of Liston. It was fear of, I'm going to blow it. I'm going to blow it. And that prompted a lot of the hysterical things he did. You had to be there the morning of the weigh-in. He comes through the door with an African walking stick. Liston is sitting up on a stick. This is the Miami Beach Convention. Where's the chump? I want the chump. You're going to find out. And Liston looks at him like he's crazy. But he's banging that thing. You got no chance. This is terrible. I'll murder you. You got, and Liston looks around and says, what the hell's wrong with this guy? And then the doctor who wants his FaceTime, they all want their FaceTime on television. He said, oh, his blood pressure is near stroke. It wasn't near stroke. But he says it. All right, now I'm driving back to my hotel room to write the story. And I got a local radio station disc jockey. He's on. He said, oh, report just came in from a guy we know who's at the airport. He says, Cassius Clay is trying to buy a ticket to anywhere to get out of Miami Beach. And I'm saying, well, I can't believe that, but who knows? When I get to the fight, the first fight is his brother, Rahman. With that fight, he said Clay, of course, not Ali. And Rudolph Valentino Clay, his brother. And he's in the first fight. He's a professional debut. And I hear this voice, and I look back. Well, the place was empty. You could hear the peanut vendors. I mean, nobody came to the fight. And this voice is saying, get your hands up, move to your left, move to your left. It's Ali in a sports shirt, giving instructions. I said, yeah, he was trying to get out of the country. Now, that didn't make me think he was going to win, but I knew damn well everything else was bullshit. Okay. At the start of the fight, he surprised. Sonny was not in shape. At the start of the fight, Sonny was laughing at him. Sonny didn't take him seriously. At the start of the fight, Ali carried aggressively. The jab surprised Sonny, and he had to figure it out. Second round, of course, I think Sonny won the second round. Looked a lot better. Ali was winning the fight on my scorecard, but it wasn't this huge, horrible upset. Well, it was because it was Ali, but I mean, there's plenty of time for Liston to catch up with him. I think the fight ended the fifth, sixth round, somewhere around here. And then he comes back to his corner, third or fourth round. I can't see, I'm blind, take the gloves off, take the gloves off. Well, I thought about that moment. Ali gave me a lot of moments to think about what really happened. Here's the way I see it. There are three possibilities. Well, when he came out for the next round, I noticed, and any fight trainer will tell you the same thing. The cut stopped briefly. It was black. That means they used Moncel, an illegal substance, to stop it. And Moncel is illegal for one good reason. If it gets in your eyes, it can make you blind. And you don't want the confusion in a corner where maybe something happens. So here's my theory. Number one, Willie Reddish, the trainer, put Moncel, told Joe Polino, put Moncel on the gloves because he realized that his fighter wasn't going to do well. The other possibility is that Joe Polino, in the hurriedness, because Liston never had been cut, that some of the Moncel got on the glove. That's a logical explanation. Another one is that Joe Polino put it on the glove. He just smiled every time I asked him that, and that was the end of that. The final thing was, though, Sonny could have said it, but I don't think that. Sonny thought he was going to still knock him out. But that put everything in jeopardy. Ali's association with the Nation of Islam had just come in, and that's not his Islamic association. Of course, when he died, till the day he died, the last 20 years, he was a devout Sunni Muslim, and I know that for a fact because he's my friend. But this time it was a Nation of Islam, and I think it exists also in Great Britain. I don't know. It's a religion, but at times it becomes a little bit of a cult. And when they came to camp, all of a sudden everybody was replaced. The hangers on were replaced by these guys, and they were sitting underneath his corner. And when he jumped up, I'm blind. They started screaming at Angelo. What did you put in his eye? Well, Angelo got scared, took the towel he was working on to wipe Ali's eyes clean, but I'm not sure it was the same towel, and rubbed his eyes with it and said, see, it's not me, it's something else. So they get him out to the ring, and of course we know what happens. He runs like a thief that round, and then he wins the damn fight. Clearly, Sonny sits on his stool and isn't going to get off. Two things in Sonny's life made me think about something he had told me. That was one. Why didn't he get off the stool? Remember, the cut was below the eye. You get it up here, you're in trouble. The blood goes into the eye. This blood has nowhere to go but down the side of your face. So why did he sit on his stool? And why did he not get up after he was down in Lewiston in his second fight? Sonny once told me, yeah. And by the way, there was a punch, and I can explain it to you, but let's not get ahead of ourselves.
No, we'll get to that in just a sec. I'll just fill in just a little bit of context from some of the things the things you've said there. I want to interrupt as little as possible. I mean, everything around those two fights, and particularly that first one, was you mentioned the Nation of Islam, and Elijah Muhammad was around that week. Malcolm X was there. There were political influences around.
No, Elijah, no, Malcolm was here, not Elijah.
Okay. But there was a lot of political. There were goings on around that fight that you can't really. That only you could understand really if you were actually there. And
that fight was not fixed. I don't care what anybody says. Because the most surprised guy in the building was Ali. I mean, that's when he ran over. I fooled you. I fooled you. I fooled you. If you remember, he was leaning through the rope and pointing at me too. And the second fight, everybody says no punch, phantom punches, and that. I want to explain that, and then we can put it both together. The second fight, Liston went to Plymouth Rock to train for. There isn't much you can do in Plymouth Rock. Yeah, the ocean's still there. It's out there. There isn't much else you can do. He got in the best shape of his life. He looked so good. I was going to pick him to beat Ali in the second fight. And then Ali, something's always looking after Ali. As one of the fight people that said to me, he popped his freaking G-string. He got a hernia. And they had to stop the fight. I mean, they had to postpone it. 6 months. Sonny Liston could not get back in that shape. He was an old man. He couldn't possibly. And he decided the only way I can win this fight is to knock him out in the first round. And if you watch that round, he goes after him. He throws a million jabs. He misses a million jabs. And every time you miss a punch, you're off balance. And Ali's got his right hand up real high. And if you look at it, it's so quick. He chops it down. Just because Liston has missed it. He's off balance. You could have pushed him with your index finger. He would have gone down. So, yes, there was a punch because technically it made contact. Yes, it put him down because he was off balance. Could it keep him down? Hell no. Now, if you remember the sequence, and I'm going to go back to what Liston told me, and it goes to Winston. He didn't say it. He said it long before that. Ali wouldn't go to the neutral corner. Do you remember that? He's, get up, chump. They're not going to believe it. Get up, chump. Get up, And they had to shove him to a neutral corner, which gave Liston a little time to think when he was laying down there. And I thought about, not then, but later on, trying to figure out the mystery here. I thought about the first fight when he didn't get off his stool. I thought about the second fight when Ali had that look in his eye and he stayed down. And he wasn't hit hard enough to stay down because he did get up. And I realized he had told me something one day about prison. He said, I don't worry about those big weightlifters in the yard, the 6'4" and 5 guys with all the muscles. They come around and give me some crap. I take care of that. It's the 5'7" guy with that look in his eye. I don't want any part of. And prison's an education in some ways. Not a good one, but it is. And therefore, I think that was his logic behind his loss of the third round. He would have lost the second. If he got up, Ali, he was right. Ali would have knocked him out of the ring by then. But I really believe that he stayed down the second fight for his own purposes. And the first fight, he figured it's a freak. I'll knock him out next time. Anyway, to hell with it. I'm not going to go out and get enough more punishment because he was losing that fight. And he's a great enigma. But like I say, the chapter in the book about Liston is called The Gatekeeper, because by losing the second fight, Carbo no longer has a heavyweight. Blinky no longer has a heavyweight. Heavyweights are free at last, sort of. Nobody in boxing is ever free at last. But anyway, so that's those two guys. Ali went on. He did things that he amazed me so many times. I want to tell you a story about Ali and Foreman, if you want to hear it.
Always.
Okay. Ali's going to fight Foreman. I've just come from interviewing Foreman. It's the first time I met Foreman. And we hit it off right away, which was saying, oh, the bad guys always hit it off with me. And at that time, Foreman was a bad guy. He learned a lot in his life later, and he's a good friend. But in the early days, he was a bad guy. In the bloody Fifth Ward in Houston, he would hit people over the head just for their cigarettes. That was so it was. And when he went to the Peace Corps, which the judge said, Peace Corps or what? And he said, I don't want to know what, I'll go to the Peace Corps. And it was quite interesting. But Ali, two things about that fight. Number one, Ali's boxing IQ won that fight. But Ali's fist did not. His warfare with Liston, with Foreman, Africa won that fight. He put him in. He made him uncomfortable. Look, he's coming here for the first time. He's at the top of the stairs. The stairs go down to the tarmac, coming out of it. And he puts his hands up and they're screaming and hollering, oh, this is their hero, right? And he says to Gene Kilroy, the business manager, who are these people? Who is it they don't like? And Gene says, well, I'm white. I'm not going to say white people. So I tell him the Belgians were there. Ali couldn't say Belgians. He always said Belgiums. He said, Sonny Liston is a Belgian. And then he says to them, of course, the crowd starts Ali Boumaier. He picks that up, and that is his theme song from that moment on till it's over. I saw him in the gym in Selly, the military complex where we were living. After it's over, he takes the microphone, he walks around the ring, he's got a whole audience of Zaire, people from Zaire. And he says, I'm told the Belgians were very mean to you people. I'm told that the Belgians put dogs on you, attacked you. And they're all saying, yeah, that's right. He said, well, did you see the big dog that Foreman came here with? It's a Belgian Shepherd. The whole place goes wild. He said, I hereby proclaim that George Foreman is a white man and a Belgian. So, he owned the whole country, they couldn't miss it. And the fight itself, I was puzzled in the beginning when he went to the corner. I've seen a fight like 90 times now. Having watched it again, I realized he got hit close to the throat in that first round. He went to the ropes because he was hurting. And he says, I'll put my hands up, I'll try to figure it out. Well, here's Liston with arms as wide as steel workers, because he didn't know how to fight at that point. He's trying to go through Ali's gloves. He could have broken his arms. He's trying to go through Ali's gloves, and those gloves aren't moving. And he ain't getting through. And Ali's thinking of it, and he's making his plan and everything else. And when he came off those ropes, if you check the film, the round before, he tested him. He hit him with the right hand and Foreman backed up a little bit. Then the next round was the round. Right, left, superfluous right hand. It was over. And I want to tell you something. People always ask me how I remember Ali because of our friendship. Two ways. The first was the night of that fight. It poured a tropical African rainstorm an hour after the fight. If it had been an hour earlier, there would have been no fight. Okay? Number one, someone was looking after Ali. Number two, he leaves and goes back to I'm writing. I can't talk to him. All right. Now, Dave Anderson from the Times, the late Dave Anderson, good guy, good writer, Pulitzer Prize winner. We're on this bus going back, and I said, Dave, I'm not happy with what I wrote. It was just, it had to be done so fast. It had to be done. I want to go look for him. What, you want to come with me? He said, yeah, I do, but where the hell are we going to find him? It's a 400 or 500 acre military. I said, I know where he'll be if we can find him. He's going to go to the river because he's into all this mysticism. We go down by the Congo. They were calling it the Zaire River then. Halfway, the other half of it was the Congo River. And there he is. And he's looking out at what used to be French Congo. And his arms are up in the Rocky pose. And he's staring across the river. And we don't say a word. He doesn't know we're there. Now, the interesting thing about this is he's not performing. As far as he knows, he is all alone in the world. He can't see us. We're behind him on this little hill. And he's yelling. We can't tell what he's yelling. Then he puts his arms down, turns around, starts to walk, and he sees us. And he gets to us and says, fellas, don't ask me about what tonight meant to me, because you wouldn't understand and I couldn't explain it. But when I think about him today, I think about him with those arms raised to the heavens. In that moment, he was truly the king of the world. That's one way I remember him. The other way, huh?
No, go on, sorry.
The other way is I try to forget everything about the Holmes fight. I don't root for fighters. I can't. I never, I bet, but I never bet on the Kentucky Derby because I thought I'd be looking for my horse. I'd never see what happened in a race. So I try to keep objectivity. I absolutely lost my objectivity the night that he fought Holmes, not because I wanted him to win the fight. I wanted him not to take the fight, but he couldn't throw a punch. And I jumped up and yelled at Richard Green, the referee, Richard, stop it. You're going to get him killed. And I realized what I had done. It was the worst breach of, I can't say sports etiquette because there is no etiquette in sports, but whatever the accepted norm is, I couldn't believe I did it. Well, afterwards, I'm walking around the casino. Sinatra's in the showroom, and he starts to bullshit talk about he just came from Allie's room. I said, I don't want to hear that crap. I go gamble. So I lost, and I gambled some more, and I lost some more. Now I'm getting pissed off because I'm losing bets. So now I go into the men's room, 4 o'clock in the morning, and this old Afro-American guy is handing out towels. I say old. Today he'd be a kid to me. Back then he was old, right? He's got a face like an aerial map of the Burma Road, with its wrinkle here, a scar here. Hands me a towel, and I say, sir, I don't think I'm really presumptuous, but do you mind if I ask you a question? He said, sure, go ahead. Did you bet on this fight? And he said to me, I sure did. And I knew it was superfluous, but I said, and on whom did you bet? And he looked at me and he said, I bet on the man who gave me dignity. Find a better eulogy than that.
No, I remember reading that. in the book. And Matt, just hearing all of this, it's reminded that this was a time when the heavyweight championship of the world was the number one thing in sport, and if you were fighting for it, if you held it, then you were one of the most recognizable. In Ali's case, the most recognizable.
The baddest guy on the planet was the heavyweight champion.
Exactly, on the entire planet. I mean, things are always going to change, aren't they? But for us, it's kind of it gives a sense of. I mean, it's history, isn't it? It's you never get bored of hearing this stuff because it was.
I've been in this business a long, long time. Maybe too long, my readers would think. But I will say this. They always talk about the most exciting 2 minutes in sports is the Kentucky Derby. Boom, 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 boom. It ain't. The most exciting and the most exciting moment is gone. They would say it'd be the first pitch of the World Series, it would be the Derby. You're sitting at ringside. It's before all the bullshit. No smoke, no mirrors, no raps, no costumes, no mask on the fighter, nothing. All you hear is a murmur, and it starts to grow, and it starts to grow more. Now it's crescendo. It gets louder each time somebody else gets sight of the fighters on their way to the ring. There's no music, no trumpets, no nothing, no light show. When they step into the ring, it is a roar. That could rival the old super plane, the Concorde, when it takes off. That was the excitement. And on doing that, because boxing is boxing. Remember, the beautiful thing about boxing, if you really want to know what, most people don't know what the hell they're saying. And amen. Most fans don't know. Some of my colleagues may not quite know, but it's the easiest sport to fake because nobody saw which if the Florida punch. The fans are out of it. They're not trained to try to track what's happening. So you can write anything you want, but it's the most satisfactory when you get it right. Everybody thought Joe Louis was knocking out people with a right hand because that's what they saw. He threw a left hook to the solar plexus that travels not that far, maybe 6, 8 inches. You were out on your feet, and as you were going down, the right followed because that's what you're taught, and because that's what they saw. He knocked him out with the right hand. It reminds me of being in the dressing room. And the late Jimmy Cannon, a wonderful, wonderful sports columnist, wonderful columnist. He was kind of teaching me things. I was a kid. I was the youngest columnist in the country. And this guy had lost the fight, and we go to the loser's dressing room. And then some jerk says, "Did you see the punch that knocked you out?" And Cannon says, "For Christ's sake, if we saw the punch, we'd be in the other locker room."
Yeah, exactly.
So we have a habit of really saying I think to this day, if I had spoken up too quickly with Sonny, I never would have gotten that quote about the tribe following the chief in the battle. So it was a golden era. It really was, and it was followed by some pretty good guys and pretty good fighters. Holmes was no slouch.
We'll get to if it's okay. We'll get to Holmes in just a little bit, but
whatever you want.
I've got a slight order for this. Or things are always flexible. But Matt, just just listening to all this stuff, it was an era where there were rivalries, and where it seemed like the really big fights got made.
Yeah, it was before all the politics and different networks. There was one network, probably, I guess, and there was one promoter, one commission. I'm sure.
That's the Las Vegas commission got away with murder.
Yeah, but it was easy to make the fights. It wasn't several networks, so the big fights generally got made. And I think because there were great rivalries around, it made the sport bigger and it made their own career.
You're right, but again, there was another factor. One more factor made it easier to make fights. Frankie Carbo. Frankie Carbo, you know what he was murdering. He killed 7 people, so I think he finally sharpened up his aim, I guess. And he was a button man, and he rose to own boxing. And Carbo knew boxing, really knew it. And Carbo would make the fights he wanted to see, because he knew who was good. But then because a friend of mine he's long gone now. He made a fight with Carbo sanctioned, and he said, "You can have the fight." And my friend said, "Just like that?" He said, "It's absolutely usual rules apply." So my friend said, "What are the usual rules?" "If a fighter wins, we own him. Well, when do I get him back?" "When he loses." And that was a big factor in making fights. He did it. He absolutely, after he lost the last heavyweight, he still was a major force, particularly in the lightweight division, and that's what tripped him up, and that's what got him sent to the penitentiary. But you're right. You're right about the things you're saying. And again, some fighters got fights because my father went to one heavyweight championship fight because somebody gave him a ticket. He couldn't rub 2 quarters together. And it was Joe Louis and a fighter named Johnny Paycheck. Johnny Paycheck had about as much right to be in the ring with Joe Louis as I had. When he came down the aisle, they had to hold him up. He was so scared. That fight never should have been made, but whoever controlled Paycheck, whoever was a manager of record, was working for Carver.
Well,
so you're absolutely right.
I always assume quite a lot of knowledge on behalf of Macklin's Take listeners, but and I think you'll all be aware of this, but Frankie Carbo and Blinky Palermo were mob guys, mafia guys who, with the help of a guy called Jim Norris from the International Boxing Club, basically managed
silent partner.
Silent
Absolutely.
Partner, but we're basically able to run.
And he better be silent too.
Yeah, yeah. You definitely got the impression that yes, quite. You were told to keep your mouth shut, and that's what happened. And they basically ran boxing. They owned a lot of fighters. You'll have watched Raging Bull, and you'll have seen what happened with LaMotta and Billy Fox, and then LaMotta giving evidence later on at the Kiefer inquiry, and there was all sorts of things that went on. But as Jerry was saying, it kind of disappeared with Liston. But it is really, really interesting, all of that stuff. Absolutely fascinating. And there's some good stuff written about that. There's a couple of good books that I've found that kind of explain it all if you're really into it. But one thing we do need to get onto, because this is a fight that we haven't really spoken about, me and Matt, that we absolutely love, and it doesn't get as much attention as it deserves. I don't think. And I'm going to dip into the book because it's the Thriller in Manila, which is unbelievable fight. But people would talk about the fight of the century. They talk about the Rumble in the Jungle. So I'm just going to read out something that Jerry wrote, because I just thought this was like 2 or 3 brilliant paragraphs about this fight. So it's in Manila, obviously, and there's Marcos there, Ferdinand Marcos. And one thing he did, the president, basically, one thing he did was put on this massive gold trophy for the fight, thinking this would be a further incentive for the fighters to want to win. I think what you wrote here just kind of it sums up the fights between these two, and particularly this one, perfectly. Incentive, hell, that was the last thing these guys needed. They didn't need Manila. They didn't need a trophy, and they didn't need a world championship belt. As passionate as their rivalry always was, and as unforgiving as their assessments of each other would be forever, they knew what they were fighting for. They were fighting for the world championship of each other. And that kind of performance has never been duplicated since. They could have fought in a phone booth or on a melting ice floe. It was all the room they needed. Theirs was an involvement without end. Before this day, on which they wrote their final September song, it was clear that one's name would never be mentioned without the other. They remained as tightly linked time travelers for decades, even after they left the city of Manila. It was the greatest fight I ever saw. Hell, I think it was the greatest fight anyone ever saw. Matt, that's it there, isn't it? In what, 100 words? I mean, there's nothing extraordinary
to match it. There's nothing. That fight, to me, that rivalry has never been settled, ever. Again, it was like Henry Cooper. God decided, because Joe always fought in a crouch, and his eyes were getting hurt. Swollen, and he had to straighten up to see. And that was probably what decided. But I'll tell you this: I don't go much for judges' scorecards generally. I think one thing that they are deficient in, and maybe they haven't. It's hard. Maybe they can't. They don't see the body blows enough. And this kill the head and the body dies. I think it's the other way around very often. Kill the legs and the guy can't stand. And basically, they don't see a lot of that. So my scorecard was this. Going into the final round, I had Ali ahead by 1 point. Joe knocks him down. Joe wins the fight. Joe doesn't knock him down, but wins the round. On my scorecard, it's a draw. And I really emotionally, maybe I was a little affected. I think it should have been a draw. I remember like in the 11th round, turning to Jerry Lister, rest in peace. He had worked in England for a while for Rupert Murdoch, and he was now the sports editor of the New York Post. And I said, Jerry, why don't they just say they both won the fight and send them home? I just don't want to see any more of this. I love fights. Basically for the same reason most people do. Nobody's hitting me at ringside. So, you can appreciate what you're seeing.
Well, I think it's one of probably the most legendary calls in boxing history for Eddie Futch to make the decision to pull Joe Frazier out before the final round. And actually, Ali was probably on his last legs. He may not have come out for the last round had he not made that call. Who knows?
You have it right on the money. Let me tell you, Gene Kilroy, who's really a close friend of mine, the guy from Ali's camp, swears that Ali went down to the ground after the fight because he didn't want to get hurt by the people running in. He can say what he wants. I don't think he could have taken 5 more steps forward. And as far as Eddie Fletch goes, I can tell you the conversation. Eddie was a friend of mine, and Joe Frazier was a friend of mine. I'll tell you what happened. George Benton was told, cut off the gloves. And Joe said, I'll kill him and I'll kill you. Don't touch those gloves. And Eddie Fletch said, listen, son, your eyesight or your eyes are worth much more to me than winning this fight. And it was cut, and nothing. Frazier was berserk, but there's nothing he could do about it. Now, you know, one word about Benton, because I think you'll understand. And most people don't know this. You know, Ali always talked in the ring. Always talked in the ring. He used to say to me, "Why do you write that? I don't talk in the ring." He didn't. He was so emotional, and so he was charged up. He didn't know what he did, but he did talk always. When he fought Frazier the first time, and they told him, "You don't knock him out in the 15th, you lose the title." He came out and he stopped the count, and the jab was moving, and a right uppercut. And Frazier didn't go backwards. He never went backwards in his life at that point, but he stopped in his tracks. And then he stepped inside. He hit him with a left hook. And Ali is screaming before that, "Fool, fool, fall down. Don't you know you can't stand it? Allah has proclaimed I will be the champion forever, and you can't stand against God." And Joe threw that left hook and it hit him on the temple. And he said, "Well, God's getting his ass whipped tonight." That's a true story. Frazier told me that story. Now in Manila, before they got to Manila, as you know, I always used to kid Frazier. I used to say, "You know, Joe, if your right shoelace becomes untied, you're going to trip because you got no right hand whatsoever." And as a result, Fletch had said to him, "We had 3 months to prepare. George, that's why you're brought into camp. You teach him to throw a right hand. I don't care if it's a weak right hand. I don't care if it misses. I want Ali, who thinks all the time, to say, where did that come from? Because he's never been hit by right hand. Frazier never hit anybody by right hand, just about." Well, Frazier was in trouble the first 2 rounds. If you remember that fight, he could have gone. And he hits Ali with the right hand, and Ali jumps back, and Ali yells at Frazier, "You ain't got no right hand. You're an old man. You ain't got no right hand." And he says, "Well, go ask George Benton," and he hits him with another right. That stopped the flow and turned it in Frazier's direction for a couple of rounds. And it was like a monetary chart. Most thrilling fight in the world with no knockdowns. It was for a graph, it'd be up and down. Ali's up, Ali's down, Frazier's up, Frazier's down. And it continued that way right to the end. And to me, I just, you know, there were very few clinches in that fight. And I'm going to tell you why that was, if you're interested in that. They had a Filipino referee named Sonny Padilla, who later came to Vegas. And Fletch had a guy he wanted, and Angelo had a guy he wanted, and neither one was Filipino, so they united on one thought. We don't want a Filipino referee because he's too small, too slight to be able to part these guys. And then in came the head of the Filipino Boxing Commission at the Rules Committee meeting. He takes out a .45, puts it on the table, and he says, "I have made a decision. This fight will be worked by a Filipino referee." He taps the .45 and he says, "Do I have any arguments?" Not a word. And in comes the guy. It's Sonny Padilla. Now, I don't know if you ever heard of him, but there was an American quarterback named, he was an all-league quarterback. He was a great guy, played for the Rams, and he was a Filipino. And he was the tallest, widest Filipino I ever saw in my life, and this guy was bigger than him. And to make sure there were no clinches, the first thing he did in this fight, Ali had a habit, and I can tell from what you're saying, you know what I'm talking about. He'd put his glove behind the guy's head, pull it down, throw an uppercut. And the first time he did it, he said, he stopped. Next time a point, the time after that, you're out of the building. Frazier hit him low at the bell in a different round. And he said, next time a point, after that, you're out of the building. And they knew the guy meant it. They kept thinking about that 45, I think. But it made for, I mean, look, I have to confess something that most people think my first fight was Cain and Abel. What they don't know is that my camel died on the way to the arena. I didn't get there till the third round, so I really can't accurately tell you what happened in that fight. I know one guy was marked up right down the forehead, but this was the greatest heavyweight fight ever held. And the greatest single heavyweight round was Holmes and Norton. Because I'll tell you why. Because I knew that Holmes had torn a muscle from here down to here. And the week of he tore it just before, like 10 days before the fight. I got him a physical therapist, who worked with him and said, you will be able to use that left hand. But I'm telling you this. He said, well, I want you in my corner. He said, I can't help you in the corner because if you hit me, if you get hit on that muscle, you're gone. You can't use your left hand the rest of the fight. You won't be able to. Holmes was ahead, and Holmes slowed down. He got hit on the bicep, and then as little by little, Norton kept catching up. When they went out for the 15th round, for once the judges had it right. Who wins the 15th round is the heavyweight champion. And Holmes said, the hell with it, I'm going to throw the left hand. And because he was close to being knocked out in the first half of the ring. Then he throws the left hand, he hits him with a hook, and then he wins the round and he wins the title. And but that was the best heavyweight round. And I'll give you a bonus, the best boxing round, the most exciting first round in any weight I ever saw in my life. Hearns and Hagler. Hagler comes across the ring. Hearns was a good punch. I mean, he was ferocious. He hits Hagler right here. Opens a cut up here. Now, this is a serious cut because the blood is going like this to the eyes, and the referee's looking and looking. And by the end of the round, Hagler fights back, but it was just it was the greatest single round because Hagler didn't budge. Now, at the end of the round, my boxing writer, I said to him, who'd you give the round to? He takes his pencil, breaks it in half, and throws it over his shoulder. And I said, I'm going to tell you what happened. Hearns won the round. Hagler just won the fight. Best right hand Hearns ever threw. Now what can I do? Get a gun? There's nothing left. And Hagler proved it in the third round. But that was the best first round of action ever.
It was interesting hearing you talk there, Jerry, about the Kenny Norton, Larry Holmes, because I think that's one of the forgotten great fights.
Brilliant fight. I watched it this afternoon. Because I was picking back through the book and I thought I watched it for ages. And it's an absolutely amazing fight. Is that sort of typical of Holmes's career in that he won the title in one of the best heavyweight fights you'll ever see, but people don't really remember it, and he doesn't ever really seem to get the credit that he deserved for his career in general.
No, you're talking about that was Holmes.
Yeah.
Holmes but you're talking, how did Norton get to be champion? That's the reason he didn't get Holmes didn't get the credit because he was by diploma. The WBC anointed him because I don't want to say more than I should say. All I will say is he had great influence from the Norton corner to make him the champion. Remember, Norton had fought an elimination fight with Jimmy Young, which I thought Jimmy Young won. Because Jimmy Young was a great boxer, if nothing else. He'd make you look bad. That's why nobody wanted to fight him. He'd make you look terrible. And Norton didn't look too great, but he wins the fight. And it was an elimination fight. Ali says, I'm not going to fight him because something else came up. And so Suleiman gave him his diploma, made him champion. And the greatest trivia, you'll knock him dead at cocktail parties. I'm going to tell you right now, both of you. Who is the only heavyweight champion who never won a heavyweight championship fight? Ken Norton.
Yeah, that's it. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I mean, but it was just an amazing fight, that an absolutely
he was a
extraordinary
good
fight.
fighter. You know what his biggest problem was? Well, first of all, he had Ali's number.
Yeah.
He beat him the first time.
His bogeyman.
I went to 3 fights, to all 3 fights. The second fight, I thought Norton won. The third fight, I had to give it to Ali because Norton acted like an idiot. He was so far ahead from the 12th round on. He didn't throw a punch. He kept sticking his tongue out, jumping up and down. If a guy didn't throw a punch, I can't give him the round. I had Ali winning by a point. Although going up till then, it was clearly Norton's fight. Yeah, he was so happy. He wanted to get back at Ali. To him, he knew he beat him the first time. Well, everybody knew when he broke his jaw. The second time was close, and he thought he was robbed. And the third time, he robbed himself. And it's too bad.
But Kenny Norton was probably probably the underrated fighter of that batch of great heavyweights. But the way George Foreman blew him out of there was just breathtaking, wasn't it?
Well, he had trouble with punchers, not because you're talking about Norton now, right? Because well, you know how he knocked him out with a jab. Did you know that? A jab. I was there in Caracas, and I was sitting next to Eddie Futch, and he hit him with a jab, and he looked at Norton, and he said to me, because he had trained Norton before when he went back to train, he leaned over and he said to me, "Fight's over, Jerry," and it was. Well, listen. What about the jab that straightened out Michael Moore until the right hand came? After that right hand, you could have counted to 50. But it's interesting. People don't, the things that I look for. What was it to me the most exciting portion outside of their courage and their skills of the rivalry? The second fight was horrible. Believe me, if I didn't have to cover it, I would have walked out. It was terrible because neither one wanted to be there. There was no title. Joe wanted his rematch, and Ali wanted to go after Foreman. So the fight was hard. Second fight was horrible, but the third fight, Joe made it a fight because Ali. I'll tell you, Ali fought in Malaysia against English Joe Bugner, and if it were a baseball game, it would have been a no-hitter. I mean, it was terrible. And I'm walking down the hall that afternoon, the day before the fight. He calls it. We only had 8 guys, 8 writers were there, American writers anyway. Calls us to his room and he says, "Fellas, I'm tired of it. I've been boxing since I'm 14. I'm going to quit after this. I'm retiring." So now we got a time difference. We run to our room. We're writing like hell. Ali quits and blah, 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 blah. Okay. Now, Anderson and I are walking down the hall to get lunch. And Ali's door is open. And I hear, "The man can't fight. He can't fight. He's an old man. I'll knock him on his ass. I'll retire him." Well, when we get there, we walk in the room and doors open. He says, "Hey, look at this." He's watching a recent Frazier fight on the television screen, a rerun. He said, "What do you think?" He said, "He's got no chance against me." I said, "I thought you retired 2 hours ago." I knew he didn't. And he said, "Well, I was just trying to sell tickets." I said, "Well, I'll tell you what. As of now, for the 2 of us, you better freaking well unretire right now. I ain't running back and writing a 3rd story. So don't change your mind. You're not retiring. I'm writing it. That's the end of it." And he laughed, and that's how I knew he was going to fight Frazier. Nobody was talking about that fight at all. It wasn't even made. It wasn't even on the horizon. He made that fight himself because he thought it was no contest.
So before we we've got about 10 more minutes. Mike Tyson. Given that you've seen all of the greats in the 60s and the 70s, where would you place a peak Mike Tyson? Because a lot of the time people look back at people's careers and they can go one of 2 ways. Somebody can become greater than they maybe were. With others, people look back on their careers and they like to criticize and say that maybe they weren't as good as people think they were at the time. And that seems to be the case for Tyson. A lot these days now, people say, "Oh, well, as soon as he ran into someone who was going to give it back to him, he didn't want to know." But late 86 to mid 1990, when he won his first world title, mid 1989, sorry. So he wins his first world title in late 86. Mid-'89, he stopped Spinks, and he's done it all then. He's undisputed, and he's got the linear title. That Tyson, how good was he? Because you saw all these guys.
He was the best that was out there at that point. But,
but would he have lived with the likes of Joe Frazier and Ken Norton and George Foreman, in your opinion, Jerry?
I'm going to cop out a little bit. I don't like, hypotheticals, because there's enough hypotheticals in. I mean, you watch two guys get up the morning of the fight. You don't know which guy has gas or didn't get laid 3 weeks before, or you just don't know what's in their mind. You know what I'm saying? And I know fighters who I'm not going to give you his name. He was the greatest appreciation of beauty, I'll put it that way, that I ever knew. And I remember him getting laid 3 times a day of a fight, and he was a world champion. But we'll let that go by. What I'm saying is, you don't know how the hypothetical things are bad. And like all sports, boxing changes. The boxing modus operandi when Ali beat Liston, nothing to do with what follows it later on. As different side, Joe Frazier was a shrimp, compared to most heavyweights, a little guy. And here he is down below beating the crap out of you. Everybody has something. It's like, Frazier, Tyson's big thing, they made a song out of it. Everybody has a plan till they get hit in the mouth. And my thought about that is, this is what I told Ali. There's somebody out there for everybody. Now, Foreman affirmed that for me in a private conversation about a month ago. He said to me, look, you're always writing, styles make fights, styles make fights. You're absolutely right, but you don't know why. I'm going to prove it to you. He said, I fight Ali 100 times, he's going to beat me 99. I fight Frazier 100 times, I'm going to knock him out 100 times. They fight each other, and it's life and death. The styles make it that way. And that's what made Ali and Frazier so unique, okay? They were fighting in the beginning of that fight and every fight they ever fought. And like many other fights before it, but not every fight, you have to have great fighters for it. They were fighting for the territorial imperative. Joe wanted to make that ring like 9 feet wide, that's all, so he could blow Ali to the ropes and do what he had to do. Ali wanted to make the 5 miles wide. And they were fighting who was going to, and they were so close in skills that territorial imperative in their third fight kept changing. In the first
Jerry,
fight,
I mean, it was the ultimate boxer versus fighter, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's the thing you don't find this, if you think in American, you don't find it in football, in American football. In American baseball, they talk about the pitcher versus the batter, which is really a showdown thing, but it's still not like 2 great fighters, each capable of ending the fight, each capable of winning the fight by decision, and each knowing it's got to control the ring. Fighter, boxer, that's the greatest thing, I think.
And so just finally, before this will be the last one, we'll make this the last one. We're hoping that we're going to see a fight between Anthony Joshua and Tyson Fury. People have been talking about it for a long time and talking confidently about it for quite a long time, the promoters, but still no concrete news. What do you make of those two, given all the fighters you've seen down the years? As you say, and I do agree, I'm not one for hypotheticals either. I think you do what you do in your own era, and that's really all you can do. But just watching them, just looking at them as characters, as boxers, are you impressed by those two, or who do you think will win?
I'll tell you first of all, what I think of each fighter individually. Joshua did not impress me in the beginning, except he was a young fighter. When I decided, I wasn't going to anoint him, but I decided that he deserved a lot of further study because I think there was a lot of potential there, was Klitschko. Not when he knocked Klitschko down. But when Klitschko knocked him down, Klitschko took him to school when he hit him with that right hand. And he more than survived. He knew how to survive. And that showed me, and that was more instinct than training. That showed me this guy's a fighter. With Tyson Fury, I think the biggest thing in his life was the change in trainers. I thought he would win the second fight for 2 or 3 reasons. First fight, I hate to say it this way because, again, you have to respect the guy who'll fight. But the guy who beat him the first time, a one-arm fighter, you know, and spends forever trying to throw the one arm, and he'll throw it 20 times. He's a little better now, but that's who he was. Tyson Fury, when Tyson Fury got up after he was knocked down, remember that in the last round, I guess it was. I thought he was dead. I couldn't believe he got up. The only time I ever saw anything like that was when Holmes fought Shavers, and Shavers hit him with the right hand, which is a death warrant, and he went down face first and got up. That's when I said he's got heart. Also, he's got a chin. But in this case, I felt in the second fight, 90% of what, well, not 90, 40% of what happened was the change in trainers. Now, I'm not knocking the other guy, but this guy found a formula better suited to Tyson Fury. And I'm not saying the other guy trained him wrong. I'm not saying it. But because he gave a pretty good account of himself in the first fight with the other guy. But I think he tapped something in him. That was
tactically in the second fight, he was brilliant, wasn't he?
And the second part of it is, now, I admire what he went through to straighten out and win that championship. So to answer directly, it's a cowardly hedge, but you know, that's me. These two guys fight. I don't know which one I'm going to see, and there's a reason for each fighter not to be what people are expecting. I don't know. Tyson Fury's been off what? How long? A year and a half? 2 years? I don't know what he's done in that period. I haven't seen him box. I haven't even heard anything. You know, and he came from the shadow of hell to get straightened out. So I don't know what's up, and I don't know how he trained. It's the second thing. The other guy has these lapses. He's had them a couple of times, and he's really not been tested since he's had a couple of big tests. So you're asking me who's going to win? I don't know. Can it be a great fight? I always think every fight can be a great fight, because the one thing about boxing, unlike any other sport, you can make a case for the guy who you know is going to get knocked out in the first round, but there's something you can say, some little thing you cling to. And if you're the kind of guy who puts money on the fight, you're swarming to that little thing. It's a long odds, so let me take it because he can do this or do that. And don't ask me to pick a winner. Let me, in fact, I'm not even traveling anymore because of my legs at my age, but if they were to fight in Vegas, then I could at least look at them and see. One other thing I would caution everybody: do not get too excited. This fight is not made until the bell rings. And I always talk about the Emirates and everything else. I want to see, because you got two promoters involved, and promoters are promoters. Why is it promoters, when you ask them a question, they always answer like that on the side of their mouth? There's a reason. There's always a better plan. There's always something else they have up their sleeve. And the two, I believe, and again, this is without knowing the fighters, since I did get to know Fury, and I don't really know Joshua at all. I did get to know Fury because we fought here twice in Vegas. I believe the fighters want to fight each other. I do. But like my mother used to tell me, but she'd say it in Yiddish, but I'll say it in English for you. Be careful what you wish for. You might get it.
Well, we will just...
Don't ask me to pick a winner.
Yeah, we'll just have to wait. Hopefully it is going to happen. Maybe now it's looking more likely that it'll happen a bit later in the year than we originally thought. But we're in such strange times at the minute. You know, if we could just get that fight done once before the end of the year, I think that's not bad going. Okay, Jerry, we could do this all day. I could talk to you all day.
Well, listen, because I empty rooms now at my age. When I come in the room, people run the other way. I like to talk.
Well, I mean, I kind of already do that, and I'm half your age, so. You know. But no,
I'll try to get over being so shy if we ever do this again.
This has been great. We love to do it again. We love to do it again. But we've taken up enough of your time. So thanks very much. Thanks very much. And just a reminder, the book is out in paperback next week, I think, or the week after. It's called
May 11th.
May 11th. May 11th. It's called Once
Yeah,
There
but
Were
you can
Giants.
pre-order. You can pre-order now.
You can pre-order on Amazon and Barnes and Noble but it's well worth getting. It's a great read. It's a great read. So we will wind it up there. Thanks for listening, everybody, and hope you have a good week. It's pay-per-view week this week, of course, with Parker, which is Aura against Parker. So we'll be back with some more podcasts. So I'm not going to say exactly who with, because that's always a dangerous game, because you're never totally sure who it's going to be. But we've got some good ideas. So we'll be back later in the week. In the meantime, stay safe, everybody.